link for everybody? Share. Gmail.
Okay, it's on?
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Okay. Okay, today we have up on our Shabbos menu learning. We're going to continue the subject of Muksa by foods or by items that can be edible technically, either for humans or animals. We discussed much of it already last week, and we're going to finish off this discussion.
Okay, you're right.
Okay. So last week we discussed the general rule that all foods that are not set to be eaten by a human on Shabbos, not able to be eaten by a human on Shabbos, is considered Muksa machmas gufay, the most strict form of Muksa, which means that it cannot be moved for any purpose. Of course, as we've always mentioned, it can be moved with a shinui, with an irregularity, but without an irregularity, it would be prohibited from being moved. To explain, this would include all raw foods that are not typically eaten by people until they are cooked, since it's forbidden to cook on Shabbos, and that these foods are human food, which means you plan on using it and eating it during the week after cooking. Therefore, it has absolutely no use on Shabbos, and is forbidden in benefit. It's considered completely Muksa. It's not forbidden in benefit, but it's considered completely Muksa as it has no other use. Foods that some people eat raw, so we went through a discussion regarding raw fish and raw meat, and we found over here a switch of opinions regarding the time. Back then, it was common for some people to eat raw meat, but nobody ate raw fish, and therefore the halacha was that raw meat, which was commonly eaten, would not be muktzah. But today, since it's the opposite, raw meat and chicken would be muktzah, as the Poskim emphasized, while raw fish that can be eaten as sushi would definitely not be muktzah for sushi eaters. Okay. A raw egg. Is a raw egg muktzah? See, we have an egg on the table. Not raw though, right?
No.
So would a raw egg be muktzah? What would you say? Again, the rule is it edible for a human? Is it set aside, if not, is it set aside to be eaten by animals? If the answer to both of those questions is no and no, then it would be completely muktzah.
Okay, so a raw egg is not usually set aside for animals.
Okay, so
to my knowledge.
that's right. That's a no.
Okay. But as far as eating it, in our day and age, a lot of people make different concoctions using raw eggs.
Right. Also, back in the day, it was very common for chazanim to eat raw eggs.
That's all, right?
Baal Tebet actually brings it in the laws, in chapter 328, in the laws of medicine. And he says that, however, what the chazanim do to improve their voice, if they swallow a raw egg, that's not a problem on Shabbos. So here we see a clear proof that raw eggs are not muktzah, and they may be moved on Shabbos. Now if a person says, but maybe the egg contains blood, and if it contains blood, then it should be muktzah, as the egg is inedible, it's forbidden to be eaten. The answer, majority of eggs do not contain blood. And in all matters of halacha, we go after the majority.
You're not talking in the hen house, right?
Even in a hen house, the majority of eggs do not contain blood.
Yeah, but in the hen house, can you
When
remove it?
when they're in the midst of fertilization and already growing after 2 weeks, then they all contain blood. I'm talking about prior to incubation period that we know can develop into blood.
I'm asking if a raw egg in a hen house is considered muksa.
It depends. If we know it's been incubated for a period of time that it would already begin developing into a chick, then absolutely would be muksa. Now, how would we have a way of knowing? We wouldn't. It would be kind of difficult. Only people that run the hen house would be able to know, okay, this cubicle laid the eggs a week ago, this cubicle just yesterday, and that's what it would depend on. But if you know for certain that it was laid, a week and a half ago, then there's definitely a lot of blood in there. The development of the chick is already halfway there. But in general, we don't suspect that there's blood, and that's why min hadin, there's no halachic requirement to check eggs for blood. It's a minhag that we have to be stringent, but from the letter of the law, it is not an actual requirement. That's why you can eat a hard-boiled egg without checking it for blood. And it's also why if a person put in an egg into a food without checking it, everything is kosher, he does not have to ask a shiloh. Okay. What does one do if his freezer lost electricity? The power of his house went out, and all of the raw foods that require refrigeration are going to get spoiled if they're not moved to someone else's freezer, such as frozen meat, frozen chicken. That's usually the expensive raw foods that we have that are Muksa on Shabbos. So in such a situation, first of all, one can always move the food with a shinui. Now, if a person says, but you're not allowed to prepare on Shabbos or after Shabbos, in a case of great loss like this, it is permitted to be done. And that's why always it's allowed to put away your food after Shabbos Shudas. We don't say wait till after Shabbos, you're preparing. Or we don't say after the second meal, you can't put away your food as you're preparing for during the week, as that's to prevent a loss. And to prevent a loss of this type, we do not apply the rule that you can't trouble yourself on Shabbos or after Shabbos. So in such a case, the Shevet Levi writes in the Tshuva, Vosner, that if your freezer has lost electricity, you have all of these muksa things inside. First of all, you can always move it with a shinui, as we said. But if it's raw meat, you can be lenient, like the opinions who say that even today, raw meat is still edible by some people, and therefore you can move it in such a case. Certainly regarding raw fish, for the sushi eaters, as we already said, it wouldn't be more good. For non-sushi eaters, in such a case, you would like to be lenient. All other frozen foods. So this is a misconception. Frozen foods that are not raw and are edible in their state after defrosting, without cooking, are not muksa on Shabbos. A person has frozen bread. There's nothing muksa about that on Shabbos. There's no isser to defrost frozen bread. There's no isser to defrost a frozen cake, and therefore frozen foods that are edible after defrosting are not muksa. Now what about frozen liquids? Frozen liquids are also edible in the current state. Ices, you can eat it as ices. You don't have to defrost it. So in all these cases, since they're edible, just because they're frozen does not make them muksa, and therefore it's not a problem. What a person has to be careful in general is before Shabbos or even during the week is to set up his freezer in a way that there's no muksa foods in areas that you need to reach to. So for example, if you have raw chicken and raw meat in the front and you have your chalos in the back, that's not good. As you're going to have to move the raw meat, which is muksa. You have to move with a shina, you're entering into problems. So the best thing is to set up the freezer in a way that the muksa items are in the back, are always set up that they're in the back. So too, if you leave grains, legumes, raw legumes in the freezer or fridge, it shouldn't be in an area that they block other foods that you need for Shabbos from being taken out. As those items are muksa, as people don't eat, and they would have the same halacha applicable to them.
How about if you have those things stored on the shelf on the door, and you're opening the door?
So having it stored on the door is a shaila of basis. Does it make the door into a basis l'davar ha'issa? And I have to look it up again. If I remember correctly, I wrote about this, that it does not become a basis. Let's see. There we are. Oh no, that's a different question, similar question, but a little different. In general, rule that the door of an item does not become a muksa even if the item itself is muksa.
One more time?
However, the door of an item does not become muksa even if the item itself is muksa. For example, the door of a fuse box, we don't rule as muksa. But here, this is a different question. Here we're placing the muksa on the actual door. The door itself. Oh, here we go. Oh, here it is. Yeah. Here we brought down that in such a case, the door of the fridge would not be muksa, even though it contains muksa items on it, as they're considered nullified to the door. So brings Shmir Shabbos Hilchos and Piskei Shuvas, based on another halacha brought by the Alter Rebbe in Reish Ayin Zayin, that a person who placed a candle or other muksa object on a door, then the door does not become muksa. Say a person hung with candle on the door handle. So he says, since the door has importance and is nullified for its use to the house, therefore you can't change it and make it become now primary use for the muksa and make it become muksa. Okay, so same thing with the door of a fridge. Okay. Now we're going to discuss foods that are inedible, not due to lack of cooking, that they're not eaten in the state that they're in, but rather due to kashrus reasons. It's not kosher food. A person discovered, chas v'shalom, that all the chickens, as they happened a few years back in Monsey, all the chickens are hashash treifus, suspicion of being not kosher. Or as happened also here in Eretz Yisrael a few years ago, where they came out, all the Mahadrim Ashkachas came out saying that 90% of Tzeilas Hagidin have been found to be tainted and treif, and therefore it's forbidden, all the Rabbanot chickens are treif. So does a person do such a chicken on Shabbos? It's not kosher food. Can it be moved, even if it's cooked? Not wrong. So the halach is as follows. A non-kosher food which is permitted in benefit, since it's permitted for it to be eaten by animals, by dogs, it's fit to be given to dogs, therefore it is not muksa. So nevela meat is not muksa, it's fit to be given to a dog. That's what it's designated for. Let's see this inside. This is in halacha. Ches. Shin ches ches. No, it's in tes, not in ches. Halacha tes is where all these halachas dealing with non-kosher foods is dealt with. Alter Rebbe says like this. Chlab muksa, included in this form of muksa, muksa machal skufe, complete muksa, who call ma'acholis asuris banash and the yochla achila nafilu the klavim. is all foods that are forbidden to be eaten and forbidden in benefit, so you can't even give it to a dog. There's no halacha is any food that's forbidden in benefit, even to animals it's forbidden to feed it to. So chametz is forbidden to be given to an animal, and so to basar v'chalav is forbidden to be given to an animal. That's why a person has to make sure that his animal food that he purchases in a store does not contain basar v'chalav, which many do. They contain cheese, milk, and meat, beef. That's basar v'chalav, and that's forbidden to be fed to your animal.
Milk bone dog biscuits.
Yeah. It's an instrument of Torah v'ana to feed basar v'chalav to an animal. So all these things would be completely muksa on Shabbos. So for example, if a person was drinking his coffee while checking out the cholent and some of the milk spilled inside and you don't have 60 times, so everything's treif and everything is mukta. This applies even if the benefit prohibition is only rabbinical, such as yain nesach, stam yain. Wine that has been poured by a Gentile for the sake of service of idolatry is biblically forbidden wine, just like any item offered to idolatry. However, stam yain is wine that we know he touched, he shook, but we don't know what he intended to do with that, if he intended anything at all. So that's only rabbinically forbidden in benefit. Nonetheless, it would be muksa.
So if a guest comes with a bottle of wine that's not kosher,
a non-kosher bottle of wine is definitely muksa on Shabbos, as it is forbidden in eating and forbidden in benefit, and therefore it has absolutely no use. Or you bought a non-mevushal bottle, and then you discover that the guest says, "Oh, I'm not really Jewish, only my dad's Jewish," and he, in the meantime, is pouring himself wine. And two, we have a problem with the wine. And it could possibly be muksa. Why do I say possibly? Because there's different shittas in the laws of yain nesach of what type of pouring actually forbids the wine. If the guy took his finger and swished it inside the wine, then definitely it's muksa. If he took the bottle and shook it like this while it was open, definitely it's muksa. It's forbidden to drink, so it's muksa. But if he just poured and put it back down, and some place can say that the leftovers is not muktzah, only what he poured is treif, but the leftovers will not yet be treif. Okay. Now here the Alter deals with a case. Oh, another example, by the way, of forbidden is arva. So if you have a tree that you know is from the first 3 years, any foods that fall from that tree, any fruits that fall from it are completely muktzah on Shabbos, even if it fell before Shabbos and you put it away. Now what about foods that are only temporarily forbidden in benefit? Meaning that they will eventually become kosher. What kind of food do we have that right now is aser and later will become kosher? What are some examples? One example is teva. You have a fruit tree in your backyard or vegetables. You picked them before Shabbos. You didn't yet remove turmus and maasros. They're sitting on your counter. That's teva. Right now, not only is it forbidden to be eaten, but it's even forbidden to benefit from it in a way that destroys the food. So seemingly it should be muktzah. On the other hand, hey, Matzah Shabbos, I can tithe it and it will become kosher. So how do we view it? The Alter continues. Even if the prohibition of eating this food is only on that day, on Shabbos itself, kugain tevel, such as tevel, untithed products, right? And even on Shabbos itself, the fact I can't eat it is only due to a rabbinical prohibition against tithing foods, as it looks like you're fixing, looks like a tikkun. But biblically, there's no problem to tithe food on Shabbos, so biblically, it's fit to be eaten. So like, nonetheless, it's completely muktzah. It doesn't matter how it got to its conclusion or why it got to the conclusion that you're not allowed to eat it on Shabbos. So the bottom line is, can you eat it on Shabbos? No, you cannot. What's the reason? Well, in this case, it's because of the rabbinical restriction that prohibits one from tithing foods on Shabbos. And unless it's forbidden to be eaten, it's forbidden to move these products, and therefore all fruits and vegetables that need to be tithed, that are tevel, should not be left in an area that one will need to move over Shabbos.
Mm-hmm. The back of the refrigerator.
Yeah. Okay, now what about foods, the next case scenario, that are permitted in benefit? They're just asur ba'achila, but mutar b'hana. So let's see. So the logic, as we said earlier, would be, since they are permitted in benefit, they're fit to be eaten by animals, therefore there shouldn't be a muksa. On the other hand, what if we don't have animals to feed them to? What if we don't have dogs that are being raised in the community? So what we explained last week regarding bones, that would be dependent on, are these animals raised in the community? So it's like this. The foods that are forbidden in eating, but permitted in benefit, that are able to be eaten by dogs, if that's what they are standing and fit for, such as nevel and treif meat, that's what's done with it, it's fed to animals. It's permitted to move it just like any other animal food. If it's not fit to be eaten by dogs, they turn to their ism, Shabbos. But if they are not fit to be eaten by dogs, then they would be muksa. We're going to explain the case there, but let's just focus now on this case. The Alter Rebbe here doesn't really explain whether these dogs have to be found in the vicinity or not. He just says if it's fit to be eaten by dogs, it's not muksa. Well, if it is not fit to be eaten by dogs, then it is muksa. So our question is, do they have to be found in the area? Just like bones. So, if we use the precedent that we already have regarding the bones, then we would have to say that the same halacha would apply here. If there are no animals that would eat this meat in the area that are raised by people, that are pets, then it's not considered an animal food because humans don't have a use for it. What makes something not muksa? The fact that there's an animal in the world that would eat it? It all surrounds the human race. If right now the community, your community of humans, does not have a purpose of this food because they don't raise pets of dogs and cats and they don't need to feed them meat, even if they're roaming the streets in the wild, which probably they don't want, then the meat would be muksa, just like the bones would be muksa. So it all depends on if there are actually these animals being raised in the area.
You wouldn't take into consideration the fact that you have wild dogs around and one comes into your courtyard and you may want to get it out of your courtyard.
It's a rare scenario. The question is, what is its status quo right now? So if you have a dog, certainly you would go to your dog. If your neighbor has a dog, you can think of giving it to him. Even if you don't think of it, the fact that there are dogs raised by many people in the community, it's considered by the community as a food of use to humans. That's the idea. We shouldn't get confused. The idea of the animals, whether animals eat the food will make the difference if it's muksa or not, is only relevant if it has a benefit for me as a human. If it doesn't benefit for me as a human, then it's completely muksa. What does it assist me that some wild animal enjoys this cuisine that is inedible for humans? Why would that make it be on my mind?
How is it any
muksa is
different?
off my mind.
But how would it make it any different than the fact that you have a neighbor 3 streets over that has the same?
So as we said, it's not enough just for one person in the community. It's not just by the aristocrats, but nonetheless, even if you don't have any dogs in your building, but because in this community, the community has a use for this type of food. So therefore, we judge it based on that. That since the community is considered a food, since the community has a use for this type of food. I'll give another example. There are many people that are picky with many different foods that they don't eat for whatever reasons, health reasons, they don't like the taste of it, they're nauseated, whatever it is. Are we going to start saying that in the halachas of muksa, when we discuss the subject of foods, that foods that you eat are not muktzah. And foods that you don't eat, for whatever reason, are muktzah, because to you they have no use. To you they're useless. No. We follow what generally people do. And therefore, if people generally eat it, therefore it's not muktzah. If people don't generally eat it, then it would be muktzah. And the same thing would apply here. If it has a use for humans because they raise animals which they would feed this to, and of course when you feed your animal, you get benefit because your animal lives another day. So, and saves you money from buying other food. So bottom line is that in that case it wouldn't be muktzah. But if they're not found in the vicinity, then what does it help that you have neveil and treifah meat that could technically be eaten by a dog? So clearly it has to be set aside for animals that are normally brought up. Okay, our next case is foods that are only temporarily forbidden to be eaten on Shabbos and permitted in benefit. Earlier we had a case of temporarily forbidden even in benefit. Here it's a little less. It's temporarily forbidden to be eaten, but permitted in benefit even now. So it would be its status. So if we follow the logic of the rules, it would still be muktzah, because right now it's forbidden for me to eat, and I don't plan on feeding it to any animals. So what does it help me that it's permitted in benefit? If we say by tevel it's muktzah because right now it has no use, so too foods that are asur to eat, even if they're permitted in benefit, if they have right now on Shabbos no use, they would be muktzah. What would be some examples of such a case? Something that's muktzah just on Shabbos, something that's asur to eat just on Shabbos, and will become permitted even to be eaten after Shabbos. So he says like this. The person picked a whole bunch of blueberries before Shabbos, or he cut a whole bunch of pieces of watermelon, and he left it on top of he left it in a kli, in a vessel, or let's say grapes, whatever fruit it is, and it was clean without any liquid inside. He comes back on Shabbos, he sees it's filled with juice that oozed from the watermelon, from the grapes, from the blueberries. That juice is asur on Shabbos to be eaten. It's called mashkin shezavu b'napeus. Just like it's forbidden for one to squeeze juice out of a fruit on Shabbos, so to the sages, due to that isser, forbade and prohibited one from drinking liquids that have oozed out of foods that is forbidden to be eaten, to be squeezed on Shabbos, if they are set aside to being juiced. That's another important detail. We're going to learn this in Simon Shin Chaf. Let's say grapes is a good example. People juice grapes. So the juice of the grapes, since grapes are set aside for being squeezed, therefore, it would be a problem in such a case, and that liquid would be asur to drink on Shabbos. That would be muktzah. Oh, it's permitted in benefit. So what? Right now, you plan on saving it to drink after Shabbos. If so, on Shabbos has no use.
So therefore, it would be muksa b'gufa.
It would be muksa machmas gufay, just like stones and pebbles, and if we wouldn't remove it all. Again, since the halacha really is that if it's set aside for being eaten, then the juice is permitted to be drunk. So in most cases at home, this wouldn't apply, because most of our fruits we're not juicing. But if we are juicing them, then it would be a problem. Another example. Anyone who has a hen that lays an egg on Shabbos, so on Shabbos that egg is forbidden to be eaten. It's not forbidden in benefit, just forbidden to be eaten. But since you plan on eating it after Shabbos, it's set aside for an animal. Therefore, it's muktzah. So too, if a guy went ahead and milked your cow on Shabbos, in certain cases we allowed it to be done because it's our balachayim. The cow has too much milk; it needs to expel the milk to relieve its pain. We allow a guy, under instructions of a Jew, to go ahead and milk it as brought in Siman Shin Hey. Towards the end of Shin Hey.
But that milk is,
So that milk, though, nonetheless, is forbidden in being eaten. It's not forbidden in benefit, but it's forbidden in being eaten. Let's see in Sif Chavtes, it is permitted to tell a Gentile to milk your animal on Shabbos if it's having pain due to its abundance of milk. Do not make a decree of Amir L'Nach such a case as Sar Balachayim as a biblical prohibition. But nonetheless, the Gentile has to take it to himself. Okay, so he goes through this, here the Alter is added. But this milk would be Muksa. Because it was milked on Shabbos. Even though you were allowed in this situation, nonetheless, it's considered, it's no different than the squeezing of the grapes, which is also.
or fruit that falls from a tree on its own accord.
Right, that's another example. Not over here doesn't bring that example. That is another example. That's permitted in benefit, also to be eaten on Shabbos, and therefore is Muksa. Now what about breast milk? So if it was milked before, if it was pumped before Shabbos, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not Muksa. It's not Muksa for anybody, not just for the baby. It's not Muksa for anyone because it is a food. It's drunk by humans. Humans have a benefit for their children. Number two, if it was milked on Shabbos, how is that possible? Let's say, ideally it's asur min al-Torah to pump on Shabbos. There's an issur min al-Torah for a woman to pump her milk on Shabbos. It's an issur of dash. However, in the case that the baby will not eat or drink anything else, and it's a sakana, there's a danger for his life as occurs with newborns who are unable yet to nurse, such as preemies, and the mother has to pump, then in such a case she has no choice. They're not able to take formula, they have to take mother's milk. So in such a case, she's allowed to pump on Shabbos, and of course the milk would also not be muktzah to give to the child. However, the milk would be muktzah for other people to move for no reason. As ideally, if it was pumped on Shabbos, it has an issur of being drunk. Now, even though all these foods are possibly able to be fed to animals, to dogs, nonetheless, since they're not set aside for this purpose, but rather to be eaten by people on Motzei Shabbos, therefore right now they have no use, and it's forbidden to be moved even for the need of their body or space. As always the rule, another case example of non-kosher, Alter here gives, is with foods that are forbidden to be eaten for long periods of time. So the question here is as follows. We have established the rule that if it's set aside to be eaten for animals that are found in the vicinity, due to its kashrus prohibition against being eaten by humans, then it's not muktzah. And we said, however, if it will eventually become kosher, since you don't plan on giving it to the animals, therefore it is muktzah, because right now it has no use in Shabbos. So what do we say about a food that takes a long time to become kosher? Maybe you wait, and maybe you feed it to the animals. You don't want to wait so long. The medvar namurim, what type of non-kosher are we referring to that after a long time becomes kosher? We gave examples of things that are not kosher on Shabbos. After Shabbos become kosher. But what is not kosher for months, and then after a few months pass, it becomes kosher. So the one example that we have here is chadash, new grain. As we know, the Torah prohibits us from eating any of the new grains of the 5 grains, wheat, barley, oat, rye, and spelt, that have grown, sprouted after Pesach, until the next Pesach comes. This is called chadash. So, if a person began harvesting the wheat and the barley in the middle of August, he has a good 7 months until Pesach comes and he can't eat it. So what does he do? Is it considered muktzah on Shabbos? The Rebbe says, "Davashach is hachlasu gam bechol af b'shreish lohet achas mankin chodesh mutar l'tauta lefi b'etzro kim shenich zman isuri harba reim gam b'seich hazman chol ben smachman ofrim." Since its prohibition is standing for a very long time, it's going to last for 6-7 months. Therefore, we don't say, well, since it's edible to humans eventually, therefore it's not considered standing for animals. Since its prohibition is for so long, therefore people do give it to animals as fodder, and people do sell it to Gentiles, and therefore it would not be muktzah. And this enters us into a very interesting question of what the Alter here just added, these last two words. Since when do we enter, if it's a sellable merchandise to Gentiles, into the equation of muktzah? If we start entering that, we got to change the rules of so many things we just already discussed and ruled on. For example, we discussed before regarding the meat of the Nevelis, the non-kosher meat. And we said if you don't have animals in the vicinity, then it would be muktzah. What about goyim? What about if it's fit to sell to goyim? Why was that not mentioned here in the equation? Goyim can eat non-kosher meat. Right? So why wasn't that brought up? As well as, in any of these cases, we said it's muktzah. So first of all, once again, it has to be something that people generally do. People generally will set it aside for that. If people want to keep it to eat for themselves, they're not going to sell to the guy. If it's becoming kosher the next day, then that wouldn't make a difference.
The non-kosher meat is not in a category of...
Right, so non-kosher meat is never going to become kosher. So the question is asked, why over there do we not say if it's fit to be sold to a guy? So this is Sorechiyun, but one possible explanation is that we only enter into the equation selling it to a Gentile if this can eventually become kosher for a Jew, as then it's still considered technical food or potential food. But if it can never become kosher for a Jew, then it's not considered food at all. In other words, our definition of food is based on whether Jews can eat it. So since it's not edible for a Jew, ever, therefore, it would only be based on if it has benefit to a Jew due to the animals that are raised in the community. It still has, in other words, the point here is that we're not looking at does it have a technical use still, but rather does it have a status of food on it. And if it's never going to become kosher, we don't give it the status of food. We have a similar question that's brought regarding what about non-kosher food of a guy? Non-kosher food owned by a guy. A guy comes to your house for Shabbos, and he has with him a whole bunch of non-kosher food. It's his food. It's not food, it is food. Of course it's food. Or a person's maid. A person has a maid at home, a live-in maid, and she has in her room, she has a closet that's for her foods, and there's a whole bunch of non-kosher foods, then you want to get something from there, and you want to move her non-kosher food. Is this considered food for your maid? Of course. Not only that, you actually save money by giving her this non-kosher food, as otherwise you would have to feed her a meal, which is itself a question of doing business with non-kosher food. That's another shayla, but let's say from the laws of Muksa. The point is that this has benefit to the Jew. So let's see. I go over here. It seems that if the food is owned by a Gentile, then it would not be considered muktzah, being that it's fit to be eaten by him in his current state. We find a similar ruling that the Alter brings regarding flour. He says that some opinions say that since the flour can be turned into an edible product by the guy on Shabbos through baking it, for him, he can eat it through doing that, and therefore it's not considered muktzah. We say, what do we care what the guy can do? If it's not food for a Jew and the food cannot cook it, then why is it considered food? In any event, so this is a precedent that we have, so it's requires more clarification of how we would judge in such a case. One thing is clear. Just because it's up for sale for it can be technically sold to a Gentile if it's not something edible, in its current state and will never become edible according to the rules of kashrus, it would be muksa on Shabbos. Another interesting example that's brought down is what if something is personally asur? It's a non-kosher food that's personally non-kosher to an individual, but kosher for the rest of the world. For example, a nazir who made a swear, a vow, I will never drink wine. Or I'm a nazir for 30 days, I can't drink wine. Is wine muksa for him on Shabbos? So the Alter Rebbe brings, the place can bring, in the end of Shimches, let's see what's inside. A item which is not fit to be of use for its owners due to it being forbidden for them. Such as, for example, yain nazir, the wine of a nazir. Even if he owns it, it's not muksa for him. Certainly if someone else owns it, right? For that other person, you can drink it. But even if he's the owner and he can't touch this wine, the wine for him has no benefit or use this Shabbos, it's not mukta. Why? It's still mutter to other people. It's still considered a food for other people. For even the nazir himself is allowed to move it. But once again, here we have to limit this to Jews, as otherwise, if we say that it's fit for goyim, then non-kosher food, there would never be no such thing as muksa of non-kosher food, as goyim can always eat non-kosher food. So the basis here is for yid.
Interesting.
Also, you can't say that, well, since non-kosher food is edible to people in sakana that need this food, so therefore it's not muksa. No, we judge it by, is it edible to the normal Jew? However, if a person knows that there's a sick individual who needs this food, then obviously it would not be muksa because he knows that it's set aside for him before Shabbos. That's why also medicine, when a Jew needs to take medicine on Shabbos and is allowed to do so, even though generally medicine is considered muksa, as it's not a food that you're allowed to take on Shabbos. In a situation where the person is sick, then it is not mukta and is allowed to be taken. Some practical examples based on this latter law that we just mentioned. Kitnius. Is kitnius muksa for Ashkenazim on Pesach? Yontif, during Yontif, not Cholamoid. During Shabbos or Yontif, can you move rice? Can you move kitnius? Let's say it's not raw. If it's raw and you can't cook it, so it's muksa. Let's say it's cooked. You have a bucket of hummus, kosher for Pesach, sitting in your fridge. Is it considered muksa on Pesach or not? And the answer we find, although we find in Machlekes and the Poskim about this, majority of the Poskim rule that it is not mukta, as it is fit to be eaten by Sfardim. If we rule that food fit to be eaten by animals are not mukta, certainly if they're fit to be eaten by human Jews, they are not mukta at all. Said go to Partik Gebrach, so not Shruya. Since we only avoid eating them due to astringency, they are not considered mukta. Obviously, we can also deduce a food with a hechsher that one doesn't rely upon does not make it not kosher. And therefore, it is not considered muksa. There are other Jews who do eat it and consider it trustworthy.
As long as it's not a food that comes into a different category.
As long as
it doesn't come into another category that makes it muksa begufa.
How would it? A food with another hashgacha?
Yeah.
How would it come to another category?
Raw.
Oh, right. Yeah, correct. Okay. No, we're talking about ready to eat. Another part of the case examples of muksa food, of non-kosher foods that therefore may be muksa, negavasser water. We just wash hands in the morning on Shabbos. We do this every Shabbos. What's the status of that water?
Sakana.
The water is a sakana, so even more so it should be muksa. It has no use.
But it's a sakana.
What's the sakana?
If it spills.
So don't spill it.
I'd say if it's a sakana, you need to move it. If it's a sakana, you need to move it, because you said health always comes first.
First of all, the sakana is not a health sakana. It's a spiritual sakana. It's not a health sakana.
more so, wouldn't it be?
I don't know, we don't find such a precedence in halacha to allow, can I be mechalel Shabbos for the sake of publishing an article online that professes the rights of Judaism?
Can I be Mechal Shabbos to help another Jew, a bunch of other Jews to be Shomer Shabbos?
No. Can I have Jews, take a bus to my shul? Can I arrange a bus for them on Shabbos to come to my shul?
Okay.
So, even if, the only time that we allow Hilchos Shabbos for the sake of spreading Yiddishkeit is in the case that's brought down in the Rishonim, where priests came into the town, the Jewish town, and they kidnapped a Jewish girl or Jewish boy, and are going to take him to the monastery, and then the halacha is, you're allowed to be Mechal Shabbos to save such a child, so it's a Jewish child. But if it's not that case example, then it would be a problem. It would be forbidden. So therefore, there's no heter to drive on Shabbos to give a speech of a kiruv speech to, a kibbutz. It has to be something more direct and exact. So the Poskim deal with this question, because it's a very relevant and common question. What do we do with it? Which Poskim? The Mishnah Berurah and Bir Halacha of chapter Shema Meches 3:38 deals with this question. And he says that the water is Muksa, and therefore it's forbidden to be moved. However, we have another heter that we can use here to allow moving the water. Remember, we learned in the rules of Muksa, that Muksa items which are repulsive to individuals, a graf shel re'i, is permitted to be moved, as the sages did not enact a Muksa restriction in a case where the person is repulsed by the item. And certainly these waters which are full of sbirach, they are repulsive to a person. So it's not because of the sakana. We're not taking the sakana avenue here. We're taking a repulsive avenue here that gives us a clear heter to throw it out. So to summarize, mayim achreinim water would be the same case, or negel water is treated as muktzah water. However, since it's repulsive, we are allowed to move it out of the way to get rid of it. But to move it and put it down and move it again, that would be a problem. It would have to just be moved under the basis that is repulsive to you. So an example for this would be, if you want to move one person did negel vaser, there's dirty, tummy water inside, and you want to move it closer to you so you can do negel vaser. You shouldn't do that. What's the heter here of moving the muktzah water? You would have to move yourself closer to the negel vaser and wash in that manner. When you want to throw it out, you can then throw it out based on what we said before. The next subject is a very long subject. It's brought down in Siman Shin Yud, dealing with foods that have been set aside from being eaten, that people will not be eating them on Shabbos, such as figs, which are being put aside to dry, or other foods that are being put aside to dry. Practically, it's not very relevant. We're not going to deal with that halacha. But one thing's clear, we already said. Even foods that have been put aside as merchandise to be sold are not considered muksa on Shabbos. We discussed this in length in the laws of muksa, machas, chesed, and kiss, as a person never removes his mind from food. And therefore, it would not be muksa. We have a few more examples of the foods that would be prohibited, would be muksa due to the prohibition of eating. Challah, if a person did a freshus challah, so that piece of dough, or if it was baked, if you did a freshus challah after the baking, that challah or that dough, that a freshus challah was done to is considered muktzah and may not be moved on Shabbos.
It's sitting in the freezer. Move it out of the way to get something else.
So those who keep that freshus challah in the freezer would have to arrange it, just like all the other muktzah stuff, to be placed in the back. We've already discussed a few times that a person, the chatchila, is not allowed to save challah, hafrashas challah, and it has to be burnt or discarded right away. If he really wants to save it and do it all at once, he has 1 to 2 months to do it, but it's forbidden to keep it for more than 1 to 2 months.
Good thing to re-emphasize. Good thing to re-emphasize.
We're still on.
Yeah.
And okay, fruits that fallen off the tree, we mentioned that. Okay, Mitzvah, next week we're going to finish a summary on Muksa Machmas Gufay, and we're then going to enter into the subject of designating a Muksa Machmas Gufay item for use on Shabbos, such as how can a rock, a stone, a piece of wood, a plank of wood, or anything else return not Muksa through mental designation. We're going to see Mitzvah next week.
Done?
Yeah.